On a cold evening in a quiet town wrapped in the pale glow of streetlights, a young woman stepped out of a worn-out taxi in front of the central police station. Her clothes were simple, her shoes slightly dusty from travel, and her hair loosely tied back. She looked like someone who had come from far away with nothing more than hope and a small bag clutched tightly in her hand. The officers standing near the entrance glanced at her and quickly looked away, unimpressed. To them, she seemed ordinary, another face in a city full of problems. Inside the station, laughter echoed through the halls. A few officers were sharing stories from their shift, speaking loudly and confidently. When the young woman walked in, the room grew quieter for a moment, then the whispering began. "Lost, miss?" one officer asked casually, leaning back in his chair. She stood straight, her voice calm. "I need to report something important." The officer smirked. "Important? We deal with important things here every day." Another officer joined in, eyeing her simple appearance. "Let me guess, someone stole your phone." A few chuckles filled the air. But she didn't flinch, her eyes remained steady. "No, I'm here because someone is using this department to protect criminal activity." The laughter stopped. The officer's smile faded slightly. "That's a serious accusation." She nodded. "I know." They exchanged looks. One of them sighed. "Listen, miss, what's your name?" "Elena," she replied. "Well, Elena, if you have something to say, you better have proof. We don't entertain conspiracy theories." She placed her small bag on the counter and unzipped it slowly. Inside were neatly organized documents, photographs, and a flash drive. Her movements were careful, deliberate. The office's expressions began to shift from amusement to curiosity. "What is all this?" one of them asked. "Evidence," she answered. The room grew tense. One officer picked up a photograph. It showed a well-known businessman shaking hands with someone who appeared to be under investigation months ago. Another document revealed suspicious financial transactions. A third contained a timeline of events linking certain officers to overlooked cases. The officer who had been laughing earlier now stood up straight. "Where did you get this?" Elena met his gaze. "From my brother." "Your brother?" He was an investigative journalist. The air in the room felt heavier. "He disappeared 6 months ago," she continued. "Before he vanished, he told me he was close to uncovering something big. Something involving powerful people, and protection from inside this department." Silence fell over the station. Even the ticking of the wall clock sounded louder. "You're accusing us of corruption?" one officer asked cautiously. "I'm not accusing all of you," she said firmly. "But someone here is involved. And my brother paid the price for finding out." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The initial mockery had completely disappeared. Now there was only uncertainty. "Do you have any proof that your brother's disappearance is connected to this?" another officer asked. She took a deep breath and pulled out her phone. "I have the last voice message he sent me." She pressed play. The recording crackled slightly. A tired but determined male voice filled the room. "Elena, if you're hearing this, it means something happened. I found the link. The businessman isn't acting alone. There's protection, from inside the police. I'm going to meet a source tonight. If I don't come back." The message cut off abruptly. No one spoke. The weight of the situation settled over everyone present. What had started as a moment of ridicule had transformed into something far more serious. The senior officer on duty stepped forward. He had been quiet, until now, observing. "Everyone, back to work," he ordered firmly. "And you," he turned to Elena, "come with me." He led her into a private office and closed the door. "If what you're saying is true," he began carefully, "you've put yourself in danger by walking in here." She nodded. "I know, but I also know that not everyone here is corrupt. I had to take that chance." He studied her for a moment. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. "Why didn't you go to another city?" he asked. "Because this is where it started," she replied. "And if I run, they win." The officer leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "You said your brother was close to exposing something. Did he ever name anyone specifically?" She hesitated, then handed him another document. He was investigating contracts awarded to a security company owned by the businessman. The company received special treatment. Cases involving them were quietly closed. The officer scanned the paper, his expression tightening. "These case numbers, they were handled by someone in our department." "Yes," Elena said softly. There was a knock on the door. Another officer entered, looking pale. "Sir, you need to see this." He handed over a file. The senior officer's face grew serious as he read it. "What is it?" Elena asked. The officer looked at her. There's been an internal complaint filed anonymously 2 weeks ago. It mentions similar concerns. We didn't take it seriously at the time. Elena swallowed. Now you have to. The room felt charged with urgency. The senior officer stood up. Lock down the records room. No one accesses files without my authorization. And bring in Officer Petrov. Elena noticed the tension in his voice. Who is Petrov? He handled several of the cases your brother was investigating. Minutes later, Officer Petrov was brought into the office. His confident expression faltered when he saw the documents spread across the desk. What's going on? He demanded. The senior officer's voice was calm but firm. We have questions. Petrov's eyes flicked toward Elena. Recognition flashed briefly across his face, too quickly, but enough. Elena noticed. You've seen me before, she said quietly. Petrov's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. You met my brother, she continued. The night he disappeared. The room went still. Petrov laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. But the senior officer leaned forward. Where were you 6 months ago on the night of March 14th? Petrov hesitated. That's what I thought, the senior officer said. The tension broke like a storm. Within hours, an internal investigation was launched. Files were reopened. Financial records were re-examined. Calls were traced. What they discovered shocked even those who had doubted Elena. There was a network, subtle but real. Small favors exchanged for large sums of money. Reports altered. Evidence misplaced. A system built on silence and fear. And at its center was not just one officer, but several. As dawn approached, flashing lights illuminated the station parking lot. Arrests were made. The businessman was taken into custody. Officer Petrov was escorted out in handcuffs, his earlier arrogance replaced by panic. Elena stood outside the station, watching as justice began to unfold. The senior officer approached her. You were right, she nodded, tears finally forming in her eyes, not of weakness, but of relief. We found something else, he added gently. A storage unit registered under the businessman's company. There are signs your brother was held there. We're still investigating. Her heart pounded. Is he? We don't know yet, he admitted. But there's evidence he fought back. There's hope. Hope. It was a fragile word, but powerful. Days later, the story broke. Nationwide, headlines spoke of corruption uncovered by a brave young woman who refused to be silenced. Public trust trembled, but something stronger began to grow in its place, accountability. And then, a miracle. A call came from a neighboring city hospital. A man had been admitted weeks earlier under a false name, suffering from injuries but alive. He had regained consciousness and asked for his sister. Elena rushed to the hospital. When she entered the room, her breath caught in her throat. There he was, weak, bruised, but smiling. I told you, he whispered hoarsely. Truth always finds a way. Tears streamed down her face as she took his hand. They laughed at me, she said softly. They thought I was ordinary. He squeezed her hand gently. You were never ordinary. The police station that once echoed with mockery now stood as a symbol of change. New leadership was appointed. Transparency policies were enforced. Officers were retrained. Trust slowly began to rebuild. Elena's courage had ignited a transformation no one expected. The officers who once underestimated her learned a lesson that would stay with them forever. Never judge strength by appearance. Because sometimes, the quietest voice carries the loudest truth. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks becomes the one who changes everything. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the faint hum of the city outside. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a pale glow across the white walls. Elena sat beside her brother's bed, still trying to process the miracle in front of her. Just days ago, she had feared she might never see him again. Now he was alive, weak, yes, but alive. His name was Daniel, and though bruises marked his face and his arm rested in a sling, his eyes were the same, sharp, observant, and filled with quiet determination. You shouldn't have gone alone, he whispered, his voice still rough. Elena shook her head gently. If I hadn't, they would have buried the truth. Daniel managed a faint smile. You were always braver than you thought. But the story was far from over. Outside the hospital room, 2 uniformed officers stood guard. The corruption inside the department had shaken the entire city. Several arrests had been made, including Officer Petrov and 2 other senior officials. The powerful businessman at the center of it all was in custody, his assets frozen pending investigation. Yet as Elena sat there, she sensed something unresolved. Daniel, she said quietly, is it over? He looked at her carefully. No, Petrov wasn't the top. Her heart skipped. What do you mean? Daniel shifted slightly, wincing. The businessman, he had protection beyond the local department. Someone higher made sure investigations disappeared. I didn't realize how high until the night I was taken. Elena felt a chill run through her. What happened that night? She asked softly. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, gathering strength. I met my source near the old warehouse district. He was nervous. Said he had documents proving payments weren't just local. Money was moving through shell companies connected to regional officials. Elena leaned forward. Did you get the documents? Yes, he whispered, but someone else was listening. He paused. I was grabbed before I could leave. They took the documents. I thought that was it. But you survived, Elena said. He nodded slowly. Someone intervened. A man I'd never seen before. He argued with them, said killing me would draw attention. I remember hearing him say, the governor won't like unnecessary noise. Elena's breath caught. The governor, she repeated. Daniel gave a faint nod. I couldn't see clearly, but I heard enough. The room fell silent again. If what Daniel said was true, the corruption went far beyond the police station. It reached into political offices, into the very structure meant to protect the people. That afternoon, the senior officer who had supported Elena arrived at the hospital. His name was Captain Mikhailov. He closed the door behind him and lowered his voice. I've read Daniel's preliminary statement, he said gravely. If there's involvement at the regional level, we'll need federal oversight. Elena looked at him. Can we trust them? Mikhailov hesitated. We have to trust someone. Within days, federal investigators arrived in the city. Their presence changed the atmosphere completely. The once confident local officials now avoided cameras. Press conferences became tense, carefully worded affairs. Daniel, though still recovering, insisted on speaking to the investigators personally. They need to understand this wasn't just bribery, he told Elena. It was control, contracts, land deals, infrastructure funds, millions. Elena stayed by his side as he recounted everything, names, dates, patterns he had uncovered over months of investigation. As the inquiry expanded, shocking revelations surfaced. Government funds intended for public housing projects had been redirected. Construction companies tied to the businessman had overcharged the city. Safety inspections had been falsified. The scandal began to dominate national headlines. But with exposure came danger. One evening, as Elena left the hospital, she noticed a dark car parked across the street. It had been there the night before. Her instincts sharpened. The next morning, Captain Mikhailov informed her that threats had been received anonymously. Warnings to drop the matter and protect what's left of your family. Fear tried to creep in, but Elena refused to let it control her. They're scared, she said firmly. That means we're close. Daniel was discharged from the hospital under protective supervision. He and Elena were relocated temporarily for safety. It was surreal, living under guard because they had told the truth. Weeks passed, and the investigation climbed higher. Then came the breakthrough. Financial analysts traced a series of offshore transfers linking the businessman's company to an account associated with a political campaign fund. The governor's office denied everything immediately, calling the allegations politically motivated fabrications. But evidence doesn't disappear when it's real. A former aide stepped forward, requesting immunity in exchange for testimony. He confirmed that pressure had been applied to certain departments to smooth operations for the businessman's projects. Public outrage intensified. Protests filled the city square. People carried signs demanding transparency and justice. Elena watched from a window, overwhelmed by the sight. What had started as one woman walking into a police station had become a movement. Daniel stood beside her. You see that? He said softly. They laughed at you. She nodded. They're not laughing now. As federal investigators prepared formal charges against multiple officials, tension in the political sphere reached a boiling point. The governor held a televised address, denying wrongdoing and accusing opponents of orchestrating a smear campaign. But the evidence was mounting too quickly. Audio recordings surfaced, conversations about managing investigative reporters. Emails revealed coordination between officials and the businessman's legal team. Finally, the unthinkable happened. A warrant was issued. The governor resigned hours before arrest, but it did little to ease public anger. He was taken into custody the following morning. The image of a powerful leader being led away in handcuffs echoed across every news channel in the country. Elena watched, silently, remembering the moment officers had mocked her inside that station. Ordinary, they had thought. Just a girl with a bag of papers. But those papers had shaken an entire system. Months later, the trials began. Courtrooms filled with journalists and citizens eager for accountability. Testimonies revealed the depth of corruption, how intimidation had silenced others before Daniel. One witness admitted he had considered speaking out years earlier but feared retaliation. "I saw what happened to others," he said. "I didn't want to disappear." Elena squeezed Daniel's hand. They understood that fear all too well. In the end, convictions were handed down. The businessman received a lengthy prison sentence. Corrupt officers lost their badges and freedom. High-ranking officials faced consequences few believed possible at the start. Reforms followed. Independent oversight committees were established. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. Financial transparency laws were tightened. Captain Mikhailov was appointed interim chief, tasked with rebuilding trust in the department. He often credited Elena publicly. But she never sought recognition. One evening, months after everything had unfolded, Elena returned to the same police station where it had all begun. The building looked the same from the outside, yet it felt different. Inside, new officers worked quietly. Procedures were stricter. Accountability was visible. Mikhailov greeted her warmly. "You changed this place," he said. She shook her head. "No, the truth did," he smiled. "Sometimes the truth needs someone willing to carry it." As she stepped back outside, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Daniel had returned to journalism, though now with greater security measures. His story, and hers, had inspired others across the country to come forward with information about corruption in their own communities. Letters poured in, stories of courage sparked by hers. One letter in particular stayed with Elena. It was from a young woman in another city who wrote, "They told me I was nobody. That I should stay quiet. But after hearing what you did, I decided I won't." Elena folded the letter carefully. Being underestimated had once felt like an insult. Now she saw it differently. It had been their mistake. Because strength doesn't always arrive in a uniform. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it walks quietly into a room full of doubt, places evidence on a table, and refuses to back down. The laughter she heard that first night had transformed into something else: respect. And not just for her, but for the idea that ordinary people can demand accountability from extraordinary power. As the sun set over the city, Elena stood on a bridge overlooking the river, the lights reflecting on the water below. Daniel joined her. "Do you ever wish none of this had happened?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "No," she said finally. "Because if it hadn't, the corruption would still be there. Hidden." He nodded. "You know, when they took me, I thought the story would die with me." She looked at him gently. "Stories don't die when someone believes in them." He smiled. The city wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was awake now. And sometimes, that's the beginning of real change. They had been mocked, dismissed, threatened. But in the end, truth stood taller than power. And the woman they thought was ordinary became the reason an entire system was forced to face itself. The laughter was gone. In its place stood accountability, reform, and a reminder that courage can come from the most unexpected places. And somewhere in that once echoing police station, the lesson remained carved into memory. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Because when they speak, the world listens. A year passed, but the ripple effects of that night at the police station never truly faded. The city had changed on the surface. New leadership, public audits, town hall meetings broadcast live. Transparency reports were published monthly. Citizens were invited to observe council sessions. It looked like progress, and in many ways, it was. But Elena had learned something important over the past year: corruption doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it adapts. Daniel had become more cautious in his journalism. His articles were meticulously sourced, triple verified. He had gained national recognition for exposing the network that once threatened his life. Awards followed, invitations to speak at universities, requests for interviews. Yet despite the attention, he remained the same, driven not by fame, but by unfinished questions. One evening, as autumn winds brushed against the windows of their small apartment, Daniel stared at his laptop screen in silence. Elena noticed the tension in his posture. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated. "There's a pattern." She walked closer. "What kind of pattern?" "Public infrastructure contracts," he replied. "Different companies now, different officials, but the bidding process looks manipulated." Her stomach tightened. "You think it's happening again?" He nodded slowly. "Not the same people, but similar methods. Inflated budgets, limited competition, the oversight board signs off without real review. Elena felt a familiar chill. Have you spoken to anyone? I've reached out to a contact in the procurement office, he said. But this time, it feels more subtle. Smarter. The old scandal had taught those in power a lesson too. If you're going to bend the system, do it carefully. Days later, Elena attended a community forum at the city hall. Citizens were encouraged to voice concerns about local spending. The mayor, newly elected after the previous administration's collapse, spoke passionately about accountability. He seemed sincere, but sincerity and reality do not always align. During the open floor session, a middle-aged man stood up. My company submitted a bid for the Riverside redevelopment project.